Hey everybody, and welcome to Virtual TrekCon. Sorry, I just want to see your reactions. With Sirach Lofton, as always, Jay Sisko,
Hello.
he is today. We are joined by three of the coolest people ever. Dr. Mohamed Noor, Dr. Michael L Wong, and Dr. Erin Macdonald, all the way from Glasgow. Just kidding, but you're like, you go there sometimes.
I do.
From the Delta Quadrant, it looks like.
Right.
Long trip.
I'm beaming in from today, yeah.
So the way this panel is going to work, everybody, is that we're going to talk, we're going to laugh, we're going to have some fun, we're going to talk about some nerdy Star Trek stuff and have a great time the entire way. And if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them. We will try to get to a lot of them. We may not get to all of them because there are going to be a lot of them possibly, and they're going to be, some of them are going to take long answers, I have a feeling, but we're going to have a lot of fun the whole way. Before we get too deep into it, can you guys introduce yourselves a little bit more for us, starting with Dr. Mohamed Noor, please?
Sure. My name is Mohamed Noor. I'm a professor of biology at Duke University, and I'm the Dean of Natural Sciences there now. I'm really excited about Star Trek and science in general. Given talks at conventions, wrote a book on the topic in terms of genetics and evolution as depicted in Star Trek, and I'm an occasional science consultant for the Star Trek universe.
Wow, and you have a podcast, right?
I do. It's called
Video.
BioTrekkie Explains.
What's that about, if you can tell us?
Sure. No, so it literally, it's kind of what it sounds like, in the sense that I grab an episode from one of the various Star Trek series and I pick some concept from it. So one that's coming out fairly shortly is going to be on why inbreeding is bad, like why it yields bad consequences genetically. So basically I took the episode Faces from Star Trek Voyager. There's a loose connection to inbreeding there, and then just broke down the biology behind it and then applied it back to the episode.
Awesome. J.R. Poole says 3 doctors breached the threshold of a bar. Pretty clever. He's always clever, this guy. What about you, Mr. Michael L. Wong? Sorry, Dr. Michael L. Wong.
That's all good. Yeah, so I'm a planetary scientist and an astrobiologist at the University of Washington. And I was inspired at a very young age to basically explore strange new worlds and seek out new life. And so that's what I've tried to make my career doing. Before we dive too far into things, I just want to give a shout out to Aaron Eisenberg. I had the pleasure of being able to meet him last year at STLV. And he said that he'd come on my podcast, Strange New Worlds, a science and Star Trek podcast, but unfortunately that never happened. We're all, very, very sad about that tragic loss. But he was able to sign and give me the Seventh Rule podcast postcard, and I keep it, on my desk every day to remind myself of what an awesome person he was. So I'm really honored to be on this virtual stage that is named after him today.
Speaking of which, very quickly, it just kind of hit me that my favorite teacher growing up was my freshman year biology teacher and junior year physiology teacher, and his name was Dr. Wong. And what you were saying actually reminded me of his quote before I even realized you shared the same last name, is that he said he would always say the 2 most important things in your life are your money. Sorry, not your money. Are your time and your health. Sorry, I screwed that up, but it's your time and your health. And when you mentioned, Erin's passing, it reminded me of that quote, that it's just, we never know how much time we have. And I think that's really cool that even though he couldn't come on your podcast, that you came onto his today. So thank you so much for joining us there.
Awesome. Yeah. What a really great story. The opportunity somehow ended up becoming, actually materialized, not in the way that we predicted or you imagined, but that's how the universe works. Here we are on the Aaron Eisenberg stage, if I'm not mistaken. So that's pretty awesome.
This is actually being simulcast on the Aaron Eisenberg stage and the Rene Aubergenois stage. So We're in good company. That's great. So it's going out to about 700,000 subscribers right now.
Awesome.
And what's the name of your podcast? It was
Strange New Worlds, a science and Star Trek podcast. Yeah.
Okay.
Do you have a feeling that your podcast may be a little tougher to find now in Google searches?
Yeah, I know.
because we've got the new Pike series coming out, Strange New Worlds. So.
Yeah. what do they say? Like, imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, right? So,
Sure is.
but
Yours was solidly first.
Professor Noor and Dr. Macdonald were both on my podcast. The podcast is basically sort of the same idea, taking an episode of Star Trek, finding a scientific nugget in there and expanding on what we know about that in real life. Except most of the time, I don't do the explaining. I interview somebody else who's an expert in that topic, and they get to do the explaining to me. So Mohamed was on and Erin was on to talk about their various expertise that I'm sure we'll hear a lot about today.
Wow. So, Erin, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself as well, please?
Absolutely. Yeah, I'm really happy.
Whoa, sorry, Dr. Erin Macdonald. Let's do the proper introduction here.
Thank you, sir.
Always keeping me honest.
Right. Yeah, no, I'm really happy to be here. I think of a few people in the chat, I recognize their names, but if you don't know me, Dr. Erin Macdonald, I have a PhD in astrophysics. I did my research in gravitational waves with the LIGO collaboration in general relativity, black holes colliding, things exploding, awesome, fun stuff. Yes, I was a guest on Mike's podcast, Strange New Worlds. We met at STLV, was it last year? Or, last year, I think. So if you want to learn like you said, we'll probably talk about some of that here, but if you want to learn a lot about it, we talked about gravitational waves on this podcast. I also have a channel here on YouTube. If you just search for Erin Macdonald, it's Dr. Erin Explains the Universe, but it's a whole host of things, from casual Star Trek chat to discussing the science and sci-fi to a full-on astronomy 101 course that is going on right now. So I left academia, did teaching for a little while, and then got into engineering, and now I work as the official Star Trek consultant for the entire franchise. So that's a dream come true, and that's my full-time job, and they're keeping me busy. So unfortunately, I probably won't be able to answer any questions people have about that, because nothing I've worked on is aired yet. But it's certainly exciting, and I can't wait to talk about it in the future. So thank you for having me. It's really good, and we have a great spectrum here, because we have the astrophysicist, me, we have the biologist, Mohamed, and then Mike is like right in the center, touching both sides of it, the space and the bio. So lots of fun stuff.
Planetary biologist, yeah, that's really exciting, because we've had Dr. Noor and Dr. Macdonald on before, and you guys have answered so many questions for us, but we haven't had a planetary biologist before. So that's where, Sirach has been Tuesday about this, honestly.
Awesome.
Absolutely. And I wanted to know if I should put the terminology astro in front of journalists, because I could be an astro journalist and make me sound.
You are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That works.
All right. Okay. So I got,
You have to put quantum before that.
There it is. I like it.
Oh, thanks. Thank you, Sean. Yeah.
Jake, you're also a doctor. You're a astro journalist and a doctor.
No, I'm not a doctor. I'm not a doctor. I can play one on TV. That's about it.
There you go.
But then one of you guys have to write the lines for me, because I need it to sound legitimate.
That works. We can do that.
So let me ask you something, Mohamed. What is the question that you are asked the most so that we don't have to ask it?
It's the question I'm asked the most.
Yeah.
I've never been asked that question before. It's not that one. I guess this actually is probably more up Mike's alley than mine. I guess probably the question I get the most is, like, how likely are we to find some other form of life on another world? That's probably the one I probably get the most often, though. It's much more up his alley than mine.
Damn.
What's your answer?
No. I do want to hear the answer to that.
I can try it. You can tell me if I'm right. So one of the first things I usually say is that people tend to, especially Star Trek, tends to conflate life with intelligent life a lot. Like, often they're like, "Oh, look, it's alive," and they say it's alive because it's like calling them or something like that. And yeah, that's obviously that's a good indication that something is alive. But I always say that getting a sample of liquid from Europa, you're probably way more likely to find life than waiting for the phone call.
Yeah, that's so true. There's so many instances where not just Star Trek, but in science fiction in general, they say, it's an uninhabited planet, and then they either beam down or take a shuttlecraft down, and there are trees everywhere. And I'm just like,
right?
what?
Yeah.
That's life.
Absolutely. And the other thing is, like, microbial life is way more likely than something big. And we see that just even here on our planet. I mean, for the first, I forget how many 2 billion years or so that there was life on the planet, all of it was microbial.
Yeah.
We learned that in All Good Things, by the way.
Yeah, that's right.
We did see a little bit about that
then too.
It was called goo.
Okay.
I thought you might have been asked about warp speed and if that was possible.
Oh, that's an Erin. That's a Dr. Macdonald question.
I bet Erin gets asked about the wormhole more than anything. Am I right?
I think it's a three-way tie between wormholes, warp drive, and transporters. Those are my usual go-tos. So I apologize for anyone who's been following me for a while that we talk about that a lot, and I think some of my fans have turned it into a bit of a drinking game. So brace yourself. But when we talk about bowling balls on trampolines, now everyone can take a drink. We're good. But yeah, it's we certainly we want to go faster than the speed of light. That's one of those things that is kind of a requirement for science fiction to be interesting. I think that there's a lot there. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of great science fiction that does restrict that. But for example, if you're going to base an entire series on a 5-year exploration of space and life, you're going to have to go faster than the speed of light for that to happen. So warp drive and wormholes are two ways to get there. And that's kind of how I ended up doing all of this, actually, was because my degree was in general relativity and I was procrastinating writing my dissertation and watching a lot of Star Trek at the time. I was like, I bet I could figure out how warp drive works now. And lo and behold, here we are. So yes, indeed. I love it.
J.R. Poole, who always cracks us up, says, I've got this book that I never open, The Metaphysics of Star Trek by Robert Hanley. I was too teenage to read it. But after this panel, I'll give it a go. See you guys. Also, very quickly, I like this one. Audrey says, I'm an evolutionary biologist as well, and so excited about this panel.
Audrey.
So here's a question very quickly for probably Dr. Wong and Dr. Erin Macdonald. Sirach and I just reviewed an episode in which, and it probably wasn't the best episode we've ever seen. I think it was called Meridian. And there was a planet that was, Mohamed's laughing at us already. And it was a planet that was like phasing in and out of, I don't even know anymore. It was like a different dimension.
Like going to our space and then going away to some other space and coming back every 50 years or something.
Right. Mohamed, can you ask Michael and Erin that question in a scientific way for me?
Can you make a question out of that?
Yes, please. Help us out, Mohamed.
I think it's put with the 3 words, is it possible?
I like that.
Yes.
That's awesome. No.
Great.
Okay.
Yeah, it's you fell into the yes or no question trap that I will fully take advantage of for episodes like that. No, I mean, the thing is, anytime, especially in Star Trek, we have multiple dimensions, whether you're saying fluidic space, subspace, any of that, that's all these extra dimensions conceptually that we really don't have evidence for. But there are certainly a lot of theoretical physics that taps into that realm. I think most famously, string theory talks about there being really 11 dimensions to our universe, that we only interact with 4 of them. It's all theoretical. We've never proved it, but you can make cool stories by using it, such as having a planet phase in and out of space. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think really what they're trying to do, maybe from a scientific standpoint, there's a lot of events in astrophysics and in space that are these like periodic appearances that we get, that some of them we understand, some of them we don't necessarily understand. But, we have like regular X-ray flares or, periodic variable stars. And so you do see stuff that kind of flashes and then doesn't, and then flashes and doesn't. And that's driven a lot of models that we've had for star evolution to try to figure out why they do that. And so it's interesting. It's still fun to think about.
I like it. Hey, oh man, I just lost.
I got a question for you, Dr. Mike Wong.
Sure.
My question is, there's a lot of speculation, let's say, that the moon was part of the Earth at one point, our moon. What does science say about that?
I like how Sirach and I we start off like at 100 miles per hour, and then we go, how do I word this? How do I word the question? And then we slow down to like 10 miles per hour with the question.
Right. No worries.
No, that's a fantastic question, and I have colleagues who study the moon actively and know way more about this than me. But you're absolutely right that the prevailing scientific theory is that the moon and the Earth were made from essentially the same material. There was once a proto-planetary body, and it was most likely struck by something roughly the size of Mars, which is quite a deal smaller than Earth, and that sort of ripped off part of the Earth into a swarm of particles, gas, and dust that eventually coalesced into our moon. And the reason why we think this is the case is because the Earth and the moon share some very striking chemical similarities. And there's a word, isotopes, that is often mentioned on Star Trek. And these are basically just different flavors of the different chemical elements that you can have. And because of the isotopic signatures of the moon and the Earth and how well they line up, we actually think that this scenario of the moon essentially being ripped from the Earth is the correct one.
They do say isotope a lot, and isolinear.
Yeah.
So
and just to piggyback off that, because someone asked that in the chat as well, why we only see one side of that is because not only have we kind of seen that those isotopes and the material is the same, but as it cooled down, it was still Earth was there and it had kind of pulled off of it. So it's hot, it's dirty, it's all this cloud of dust. And as it's cooling off, Earth's gravitational field kind of pulled one side of it towards it. So we have these kind of magma type rocks that are closer to us, and it tidally locked the moon. So as it goes around us, we see the same face every time. Right. And that kind of drove some of that theory as well before we were able to actually go up and test the soil. So
awesome. So our next question is on deck. So Mohamed, you've had plenty of time to think of your answer.
Thank you for that.
What is Dr. Noor's favorite alien species that appears on Star Trek?
I'm going to pick, well, for entertainment value, I'd say Ferengi, but for the scientific value, I'd say the Tholians. I think the Tholians are really cool because so many of the aliens that they encounter in Star Trek have exactly the same tolerances we do, or very, very close tolerances to what we have, where, they basically live between about 35 and 80 degrees Fahrenheit. That's when they're comfortable. They have this earth, they have this, oxygen environment. They're carbon based, they're water based. Tholians throw all that out the window. They don't seem to be carbon based. They exist at this super high temperature. I think it's like 200 Celsius, which would be really high. It'd be almost 400 Fahrenheit. And, they have the way that they communicate is through this sort of vibration of their bodies. There's so much that's different about them, and I think that's really cool. And they look a little bit more like a real species than the Horda, which looks like a rug.
Hey, don't hate on the Horda.
We love the Horda.
You love the Horda, but it does look like a rug.
And we learned a lot about the Tholians from Enterprise.
We did, yes.
Which is a dark horse for us.
Series.
Yeah. Real quick, somebody wanted to follow up on Meridian. Who wants to tackle that one?
What did Einstein say? Gravity is not responsible for us falling in love.
That was the weirdest part of that episode, was that.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I got lost in the comments when I saw that one. I was like, that's what I said. How do they... That's not... that's so hard to swallow. Okay.
I've got a quick question.
All right.
I told you I had questions.
I know, good ones too.
If somebody was in outer space, how would they die? What would cause them to die? Not breathing?
Oh, so many things.
So
So many
freezing.
spectacular things. And I mean, I'll throw mine out there, but Mike and Mohamed can do the squishy side of it. But I mean, it's cold. Space is very cold, and there's no air, and so it's a combination of freezing and then no air pressure to hold your body in where it is. So this whole idea about like your blood boiling, all of that is because there's no air pressure keeping your body in a happy peace.
Yeah, got the cosmic rays on top of that too. There's so many things. You'd just be so toast.
Not
You just be hating life, huh?
yeah.
By the way, everybody, Mohamed and I are enjoying the exact same flavor of beverage, peach pear, unplanned.
Yep.
Kinda
We should
smells like
introduce Mirror Universe Ryan Husk here.
There you go. That was the quantum entangled communication.
So this one, I have a feeling we know where the direction of where this is going. I have a feeling it's not going to be here. Well, maybe. What do you guys think? How close are we to the holodeck?
I think that's one of those, when people ask me what technology we're closest to having, I would say the replicators and the holodecks. I think particularly, you know, the military has sort of always been about 10, 15 years technologically ahead of kind of the rest of society because of funding and, you know, the focus for that. And I think that, you know, they've been able to have something like the holodeck for a long time. But if anyone has ever, you know, put on a VR headset, your brain explodes because I own an Oculus Quest and Star Trek Bridge Crew. That's just a holodeck episode in reverse where I'm just in my little boring life here, and then I get to pretend I'm on the bridge of a starship. So
I thought you were on a bridge right now.
I mean, I am obviously, but yeah. But I'm not commanding anything, and I get to pretend to be a captain in Star Trek Bridge Crew, which is my happiest place. So I'd say we're close to it. I think it's just having that more of that tactile technology where you're able to physically walk around and feel your environment. But we're close. I think another close thing to it too, if anyone pre this era was able to do oh God, I'm forgetting the name of it. Oh, if anyone in the chat can help me out, but there was a Star Wars version of it. It was like not a virtual reality, but it was kind of like a paintball / VR thing. And there was a Star Wars version of it, and I can't remember the name of it. So I apologize, but that felt like the holodeck because you did, even though you were wearing a headset, you physically walk through. It's hot. You touch things. You pull things down. I mean, that was a trip to go through that. And then you can see everyone playing it. They're literally walking through a maze in like a 12 by 12 area. And I felt like I just explored an entire space station. So
yeah, they have one at downtown Disney. I did that one.
Yeah, that's the one I did. Yeah.
Erin, remember in the Voyager episode with Captain Ransom? I can't remember the name of the ship that he was on, but he had that little thing that he put on his head, and he called it a poor man's holodeck, but it basically was a VR headset.
Yeah, absolutely. And
So
he couldn't even walk around within it. Anyway, sorry.
No, this is so far this is the best question of the day, I think. If you took an on-screen role in Star Trek, what type of character would you like? As detailed as you want to get. We'll start with Michael. Any role in Star Trek, what would you want to be? Do you want to be captain, or do you want to be the guy that's, you know, playing with isolinear chips?
I think, given those two options, I would rather be a captain. You know, like Erin, I think that's, you know, one of my childhood dreams is to go to outer space and command a mission and essentially, you know, push the boundaries of our knowledge of the universe and our place in it. So I definitely lean towards science officer, but maybe on the command training program track, sort of like Tilly is, to one day become captain of my own ship. Yeah.
What about you, Mohamed?
I don't think I'd want to be captain. That's a lot of responsibility and a lot of lives at stake. And one thing I would never do is I would never enter the freaking holodeck. It glitches way too much and the safety protocols are gone. Like, no, I'm just out of that. I think I'd just go with straight up science officer. It's kind of boring, but I'd still do it. I mean, basically I'd take essentially Paul Stamets sort of job.
Awesome.
What about you, Erin? Nobody wants to be a Ferengi or an Andorian or something?
I mean, I think my happiest place in the Star Trek universe would be sitting at Quark's having a conversation with Morn. That's like, if I could choose anywhere in the universe to hang out, that's where I would go. But I would, similarly, science officers, obviously, I think a lot of us have gone into our fields because that was what we wanted to be, that we just wanted to be a science officer at Starfleet. And, but I have entertained my headcanon to be Tilly's stepsister. I have also entertained my headcanon to be Janeway's ancestor, to the extent that when I worked at a science museum, we did like a show where we were set like scientists on Mars in the year 2047, and we had to come up with our backstories. And I literally came up with a story that this woman, Shannon O'Donnell, was my grandmother. And one dude in an entire year of me doing that show got the reference. So wow. I was able to position myself as Janeway's ancestor once in my life, and I will hold on to that.
Well, you know, Ryan's suggestion about being an alien really gets me thinking, and like, how wonderful would it be actually if you could not just play an alien but actually inhabit an alien's body, like a Horta, for instance, to bring that one back. Like, they have a completely different architecture to their bodies, a completely different logical framework. What would perceiving a universe be like as a Horta, or less extreme, an Andorian with antennae? You know, they have this other sense that we just don't have, and wouldn't it be so cool to experience that? I think that's a great idea, and I might be tempted to switch my answer.
All right, Sirach, you got a question, or can I jump in with Delphine's question?
No, but I do have an answer. Mine was Q.
Nice.
Good answer. Good.
Yeah, like that.
Why? What would be your first decree as Q, Sirach?
Oh, that's a good one. Happiness for everybody.
Aww.
Nice.
That's great. You could type Delphines and cure COVID.
Yeah, right.
Right.
If Sirach was Q, his last name would be T.
Oh.
All right, that's enough. So, so Mohamed, this seems like it might be up your alley. Could Borg nanoprobes cure COVID?
In principle, yeah. I mean, if you could, basically, if you think of nanoprobes in a way as being a manufactured antibody, and you could just say, like, look for this particular structure and go after them and destroy them, sure, yeah, that could absolutely do it.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I don't know enough about biology.
I don't know enough about nanoprobes.
It's interesting.
Like DNA, I figure they can probably act as an antibody. That seems easier.
You're right. Yeah, good point. Well, I do have a question for Mohamed Noor. We kind of touched on this a bit ago, but there was a Next Generation episode early on. It was like first or second season, called The Chase. And people talk about this a lot, and they bring this up a lot. And there was this hologram alien that said that we're basically all from the same seed, or whatever it was, you know, the same genetic code. How likely is this, and why?
That's a great question. So some parts of it are fine. So the idea that, for example, life on Earth was seeded from elsewhere is an actual idea in science called panspermia. And it's quite possible that maybe the initial life form that arrived on our planet actually arrived from someplace else and also went to other worlds. So you might see life that is actually directly related to us on other worlds. So that part is okay. The part that's really not okay is that we're humanoids and all these other species look almost absolutely the same as us and are even interfertile with us. There's no way. I mean, the divergence time between us and them is 4 billion years. You're literally way more closely related to grass than you are to a Vulcan or a Klingon or anything like that. So there's no way you're going to make hybrids with these other species. The other thing too is you get this idea of convergence, and you can say, yeah, there's sort of convergence here on Earth where, you know, sharks and dolphins kind of have a similar body plan, but they're not really closely related at all because one's a mammal, one's a fish. But that level of convergence is unprecedentedly high. There's no way, because it assumes there's almost no role of chance or random events. And we know for a fact that chance and random events played a huge role in humanoid life, but all life on Earth. One big one, of course, being the dinosaurs being knocked back 65 million years ago. So parts of it are good, parts of it, not so much.
Well, on the concept of panspermia, a question that I, often get asked is the same one as Mohamed at the very beginning. Do you believe that there's life outside of Earth's ecosystem? And I say, absolutely yes. We've sent it to Mars. there are spores and bacterial life forms that are very, very hardy, and we can not scrub our rovers 100% clean of them. And when we send instruments to land on Mars, we send accidentally, life forms with them. The crazy thing is that there are some astrobiologists who think that ancient Mars was actually a better place for the origin of life than Earth. And this has to do with the idea that perhaps you need these wet-dry cycles in a warm little pond to start polymerizing your first genetic molecules. And early Earth was likely completely covered in an ocean, whereas Mars had some water, but not as much, and has since lost most of it to space. But early on, Mars may have had this hemispherical ocean with these large volcanic mountaintops on the slopes of which you could get these raining and wet dry cycles, almost like a desert environment. Perhaps life evolved there and then got knocked off on a meteorite off of Mars, circled around the sun a few times, and then landed on Earth, spreading life to Earth, such that when we send our rovers back to Mars with little bugs on them, we're actually returning to the place that we came from. But that's just a theory and has not been proven yet, but it's a very intriguing one.
Sorry, go on.
Please go ahead.
I was just going to say that's one of the reasons, Curiosity, the rover, has found possibly some subsurface water, some lakes, and it's not allowed to dig because Curiosity was not cleaned to the level that we would want to investigate water on another planet. It's our version of the Prime Directive is exactly that. We don't want to introduce bacteria somewhere and then go, hey, we found bacteria, and not be 100% sure that we didn't put it there before we found it. So it's interesting.
I love that analogy. I'm totally going to steal that. That's great.
Mm-hmm.
You're welcome.
So, Michael, is it possible that any of those microbes or bacteria are actually surviving on Mars now, or is it a certainty that they show up there, they die?
Yeah, so these spores that we call them are sort of in this almost dead state. They're hibernating, essentially waiting for conditions to get better so that they can reanimate themselves. And what Erin just said about not going to places that have liquid water and are habitable, that's exactly why we don't go there, so that the spores cannot reanimate and then infect Mars essentially with life from Earth.
Wow, it's like that meme where it says Mars is 100% populated by robots right now. Also bacteria, apparently. Okay, here's a fun one. They were all fun, by the way. To the whole panel, which Star Trek series do you believe is the most scientifically accurate and the least scientifically accurate? We'll start with Dr. Erin Macdonald.
Oh, yes. I will say the personal preference of Voyager that I would say is the most scientifically accurate, because from an astrophysics standpoint, because I think that they did utilize the fact that Janeway was a science officer in her origins, and the fact that they were in this Delta Quadrant that had, the potential for so many new phenomenon that they were seeing. And that she would go, oh, shiny, and go investigate it. I think that they did some really cool stuff with astrophysical phenomenon in Voyager that, like I said, people who follow me, I talk nonstop about. They have the Blink of an Eye episode is great, talking about gravity wells. Eye of the Needle is fantastic, talking about how wormholes transverse space and time. There are just some gems in astrophysics in Voyager. The least accurate, it's kind of hard to name and shame the original series because it was over 50 years ago, and we've learned so much since then that, one thing that I love is that there's sort of this kind of jokey, but like kind of not debate about the origin of the term black hole, because it first showed up in 1967 alongside the original series, where they found, I think, like a hole in space or a void in space that was black. And so there's always kind of this joke, but that was the first time it was ever coined in a scientific paper, was the same time that the original series was airing. So I don't want to shame them too much. I mean, we can always joke about the creative license of some of the episodes that they took, but I think they've done overall, when there's been an opportunity to insert science, all of the series have done a great job of that.
Right. Right.
Yeah, I would second that. Just like Star Trek is so famous for being a cultural reflection of the time that it's being created in, it's also a reflection of the science that is known at the time. And so the original series is certainly the least scientifically accurate, just given how much we've discovered since then. So, in Discovery, we had gravitational waves mentioned and things like that, which were only discovered a few years ago, thanks to the hard work of Erin and her colleagues. And so I'd say that the most scientifically accurate Star Trek series will be the one that Erin and Mohamed helped write.
What an answer.
That makes me so happy. I just got chills.
What about you, Mohamed?
I have exactly the same answers as both my colleagues here. I mean, with Erin too, my TOS. I mean, one of the things I love with TOS is the complete absence of genetics. But honestly, at that point in time, we hadn't even sequenced DNA yet. So there's one episode, Conscience of the King, where they're trying to figure out if this person is some past leader, and instead of doing a genetic test, they do this voice analysis. Like, what? What kind of analysis is this? Why would you do this? But I mean, at the time, they didn't have an alternative, so that's what they used. Whereas Voyager, especially on the genetics front, they have a ton of genetics in there. And then as you get to more recent series like Star Trek Discovery, they introduce things like horizontal gene transfer. Like, whoa, this is really on point.
Wow.
Well, Mohamed, that was one of the cool things you did for your book, right? Is you mined all of the dialogue for references to DNA and genetics, and just seeing how we learned about it as a society and how it inserted itself into Star Trek is awesome. Yeah, because you've talked about genetics and Enterprise a lot as well.
Yeah. Enterprise definitely had a lot more genetic terms, but didn't have as much detailed description that shows up. Does it show up?
Yeah, a little bit. There you go.
Kind of, yeah, there's a line there showing what fraction of episodes use the terms DNA or gene or things like that. And it goes up with every subsequent series.
Huh. Now your lighting has to adjust to you. There you go.
Oh, yeah.
From somebody that doesn't know anything about science, I would assume, personally, it seems like the ones that maybe made me raise my eyebrows the most was Discovery's spore drive and bringing people back to life in a mushroom cloud and all that kind of stuff.
Creative license.
I'm not a scientist here, but I call never mind on that. But the ones that also did seem, on the other hand, like I thought Enterprise was a lot more likely, but that's because they're the earliest one chronologically, so they didn't have to make huge leaps. And Picard, I thought, was super accurate with their pop-up ads when they're going to the space Vegas, really, really smart and accurate. I'm not going to say what some people were answering in the comments because Sirach would get angry with their answer.
No, I wouldn't get angry, but I did want to say that I'm sure Michael Okuda has a lot to do with the evolution of Star Trek science and how well and accurate it's portrayed.
Yeah, and Andre Bermanis and Narain Shakar, they both came on later in Next Gen and then stayed on through DS9 and Voyager. And I think that shows, like you said, kind of the contributions of Okuda and Rick Sternbach and then the other two as science advisors. It really, really does show. And we have to give our disclaimer, Mohamed, that we did not work on Discovery 1 or 2.
Yep. No spore drive to us.
I was being really careful when I said that.
We're not responsible for the spore drive.
Nothing to do with that.
All right. Okay.
Dr. Erin?
Yes, I do. So I have an Audible original that was published by the Great Courses. And so I wrote and narrated it, and it's called The Science of SciFi. But it mostly focuses on general relativity and space-time in science fiction, talking about how warp drive works, how transporters could work. faster than light travel in general, and then even going on into the fun side of multiverses and time travel, and all kind of explaining the science behind it, but rooted really in the science fiction. And it's definitely aimed at people who do not have a physics background. I think that there's a lot of really great, especially people who aren't necessarily professionals, but probably know a lot of the stuff in there. But if you're a sci-fi fan, I hope that there's something for you as well.
It's a stellar book and a really good pace too.
Thanks.
Good choice of adjectives, by the way.
Yes.
That was deliberate, I bet.
Oh no.
What? There was a great one here. Oh, here we go. And this one can start with Sirach, because I think Sirach's got a favorite. What's your favorite technobabble?
Ooh.
Oh, self-sealing stem bolt.
Yeah.
Yes.
Anything,
That's amazing.
anything self-sealing stem bolt. It's difficult to say.
That's awesome.
We're all just sitting there going, say it.
Say it 10 times fast.
What about you, Michael?
Goodness, there's so many good ones to choose from. I guess something that comes to my mind right now is the Heisenberg compensator. I thought it was very brilliant. And so for those of you who don't know, according to the laws of quantum mechanics, you are not allowed to know the exact position and momentum, or you can think of that as the velocity, the speed and direction of a subatomic particle at once. You can't know both of them, but you do need to know both of them in order to map out all of the atoms of a human body or a humanoid body or anything that you're transporting, and then reconstruct it exactly as it was in another location. And so that principle that you can't know both of those things is called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. So I believe it was Mike Okuda who wrote into the technical manual for TNG, the transporter contains a Heisenberg compensator to get around that that bit of physics. And yeah, I thought that was a brilliant move.
It's brilliant. It's brilliant. Yeah, mine would have been that as well. So well done. But yeah, and I think they do even mention the Heisenberg compensator in one TNG episode where Barclay's being haunted by the transporter accident. I think at one point he's working on a Heisenberg compensator. I love it. But my second choice would be chronotons. such a great made up scientific sounding name for time particles.
Yeah, yes.
I love it. It's nonsense, but I can't discount just how great it sounds, and it sounds real. But the other one that I love that I think a lot of people don't realize is an actual scientific term and not technobabble is tachyons. That, tachyons are an actual theoretical particle that, you can interpret it as maybe negative mass or imaginary mass, but they constantly travel faster than the speed of light. And so we use them in Star Trek to, reference time travel or warp speed or any of that. But that's not made up for Star Trek. Tachyons are a real thing. Just use them well in Star Trek.
And Sirach, we just talked with Ira Stephen Bear and Robert Hewitt Wolf about tachyons, right? Sorry, not tachyons, chronotons.
No, chronotons.
I can only hang on to one scientific thought at a time, guys. Chronotons.
Yeah, and in addition to that, we have an Eisenberg compensator on the podcast.
Oh.
First year.
Awesome.
That was just
Yep.
So, Mohamed, what's your favorite technobabble?
So one that's not a real term, but they made up, it actually is a real concept that there actually is a term for, but I think they just couldn't find it or something like that, is in second season of Next Generation, where they talk about replicative fading, where they had this colony of clones, and they basically make clones off of clones, and eventually they start not working so well. Which makes sense. You can think of it like a Xerox copier. If you make a copy of a copy of a copy, eventually it's you start losing some of the content in there, and that's a real biological concept. It's actually it's called Muller's ratchet for a reason I won't go into, but they called it replicative fading. Actually, I was like, wow, that's actually better than that's a better term than the real term. It's at least more intuitive. So I thought that was pretty cool.
That's awesome.
Here's a good one. We'll skip through myself and Sirach super quickly and get to the smart people. It says for Ryan and Sirach and the smart people too. What scientific principles and theories did you learn about through Star Trek that you didn't know about before seeing it on Trek? Sirach, do you have one?
I just learned about how to use an iPad and a stylus long before they ever came out.
Awesome.
That's brilliant. That's
I'm gonna
brilliant.
say tachyons because I didn't know that those were real things until Erin just told us. What about you guys? Was there something in Star Trek that you didn't necessarily know was a thing, or if you don't have an answer for that, was there something in Star Trek that you said, wow, you're right, that could actually work? I mean, like the Heisenberg thing was right up that alley. Michael, something like that?
Yeah. So, one reason why I love Star Trek and science fiction in general is that it really helps us stretch our imaginations to try to imagine life as it could be out there. And I think this is really important for us to understand that we only have one data point on how life can be, and that is life on Earth. And there is so much diversity of life on Earth, but we're all connected by this one web, this one tree of life from a last universal common ancestor. And life out there that proliferated in from a different origin might look very different. And so, in trying to wrap our minds around how life could be out there, we often look to science fiction for inspiration. And I wrote a paper earlier this year, actually, that tried to come up with a definition of life that was more general, yet still very specific as to what it was trying to aim for, to incorporate possibilities for life out there. And this was in collaboration with my colleague Stuart Bartlett at Caltech. And we ended up describing life in its general state using 4 fundamental processes. And one of them is learning about the universe, encoding information about the environment. And we took actually inspiration from the Borg, right? So the reason why we didn't say Darwinian evolution, which is in most textbook definitions of life, the way that learning is stated, right? You must be able to do Darwinian evolution. Well, guess what? The Borg don't learn Darwinianly, which is, descent with modification. You sort of have offspring, those offspring of variation, and then natural selection selects those that will continue to propagate. But the Borg don't undergo those natural mutations. There isn't any descent. Inheritance is different. They do something more akin to what's called horizontal gene transfer, which is very common amongst simple-celled life forms, in which they allow other life forms to generate novelty. And then they assimilate those. That's how they learn about the universe in a horizontal rather than a vertical fashion. And so thinking about the Borg, thinking about the Horta, thinking about the Tholians really helps us try to imagine forms of life that we should perhaps try to expect when we look out into the universe, so that we don't miss it if it's there.
Wow, good stuff.
That's an amazing answer.
What about you, Mohamed? It's a tough act to follow.
That's a very tough act to follow. Well, I mean, the good news for me is I started watching Trek when I was like 8. So I knew almost nothing. So, I mean, even things like, that light had a speed. I mean, I didn't know any of those things until I watched, Star Trek. And that was fairly nicely explained. I was like, oh, this is faster. What is this warp thing? And that being laid out, a lot of the basic physics, a lot of the basic, again, I had the advantage of at 8 years old, I knew almost nothing. So
Yeah.
Well,
I mean, I came into Star Trek as a fan a little bit later. That it wasn't really until I was in college as a physics major that I started watching a lot of it. But that being said, I had seen the Trouble with Tribble episode very early because I think it's such a classic. It was always played, so you just end up seeing it. And honestly, I do have this is a great question because I'd never really thought about this, but I genuinely have a memory of starting to understand exponential curves because of the Trouble with Tribble episode. The idea that you have these dividing, duplicating species, that it's going to get so much worse. I think that was probably my first, I don't know. I just have this memory I hadn't thought of where I was like, oh, right. That's bad. That's going to keep getting bad. And that's really hard to contain. So that's really interesting. I like it.
And Taurus says what we're all thinking when you said the Heisenberg compensator. That's a Breaking Bad reference, by the way, everybody.
Yeah.
That's pretty good. Here's a quick and fun one.
Oh, he's Greg Mendel. Whoa.
Greg Mendel. Which
founder of modern genetics.
He's what?
Founder of modern genetics.
No way.
Modern, yeah.
It's amazing. Well, hello, Gregory.
I think that's Gregory. Gregory.
I feel like I should have dressed up.
Yeah, right.
Which ship station planet would you beam to today if you could, and why? Erin?
I kind of addressed this already. I'd go to Quarks on Deep Space Nine. I love it. It's got my vibe. That's everything I want, from the ridiculous holodeck programs to just a cozy bar where everybody knows your name in space. That's all I want in life, and I love it. I just want to be friends with Garrick and Morn. So.
Would you choose Scotch gum with Chief O'Brien?
No, I would try to dig out whatever Scotty has passed on to future engineers that is no longer synthahol, and or
play darts?
Yeah, right. Playing darts. That's all. Everything about Quarks on Deep Space Nine is my kind of scene. So that's where I would go.
Little Dom Jot.
Yeah,
exactly.
Dom Jot human.
I'd steal money from Ferengis. It's just, it's awesome.
Sirach, what was the line that you were like, that Jake's become a hustler at the Dom Jot table?
Yeah. When you get enough double girls, you become a Dom Jot master.
What about you, Mohamed? Ship, station, planet?
I want to pick a planet that had really different ecology than we have here on Earth. So, I mean, the one that came to mind just off the top of my head was Andor. There's this really cold planet. So, what happens? Are there trees there? How is there oxygen on this planet? It'd be really interesting to kind of explore that just from a scientific perspective. I think I wouldn't want to stay very long because I don't really like the cold that much. But it'd be really neat just to see how does that work.
And Vulcan's super hot.
Yeah, I don't want to.
Michael, do you have a preference or wish?
I love all of those options so far. I guess what I would do is I would join Erin at Quarks for a little bit, and then I would take a runabout into the Bajoran wormhole. And I think that and Erin, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think wormholes are supposed to not really be stable phenomena on their own, and there has to be something exotic keeping them stable. And in Star Trek, the answer is that the prophets do, the wormhole aliens. But I think that if there were a stable wormhole out there, we would learn a lot of fundamental astrophysics by going into it.
It's a good option.
And Michael, since Mohamed and I were talking about too cold and too hot, can you explain to us the Goldilocks zone, please? I mean, it's kind of where they got the name, right? And how likely it is to, Mohamed's like, man, that's a pretty good segue there.
Good question.
It's a great segue. Yeah, it was.
How likely is it that we're going to find, planets that can inhabit life within the Goldilocks zone as compared to out of the Goldilocks zone?
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. So the Goldilocks zone is this basically a region around a star for which an Earth-like planet could maintain liquid water on its surface. And that is sometimes called the habitable zone, although people don't like calling it that because we know of places in our own solar system that are outside of the habitable zone that may be habitable, like Jupiter's moon Europa, very much like Andor. And just like, Mars is within the habitable zone, but it's not Earth-like. So it's not habitable as habitable as Earth, at least. Just because you're in the habitable zone doesn't mean that you're a habitable world. So it's like sort of the first step. But it's a good thing to keep in mind because it helps us narrow down the space of planets to interrogate for signs of life. Right now, we actually can't determine if any planets out there are habitable or inhabited, we need the next generation of telescopes, these much larger, colossal instruments to be able to do that. And one of them, called the James Webb Space Telescope, will hopefully everybody at home knock on the nearest wooden object, that will launch next year. This thing will finally allow us to understand whether or not Earth-sized planets in the Goldilocks zone of their stars will actually have atmospheres, which is sort of the nice cozy blanket that keeps everything habitable here on Earth. And so we've actually discovered Earth-sized planets in the habitable zones of other stars. We've discovered maybe a few hundred of them, but we don't yet have the technological capability to search for biosignatures on them. So we know they're there, but we don't have our tricorders out yet to search for those biosigns.
It's a great analogy.
And thank you very much to JT Kirk 86 for a very nice comment. We're looking forward to doing several more days of this too. Here's a question that I don't even think Sirach and I would fully understand, but maybe you guys. Is scientific truth necessary or probability?
Ooh.
I don't know who wants to tackle that one. Sirach?
It's a necessary probability. That's my answer.
Perfect.
Nice.
I like Sirach's answer, actually.
Well said.
It's tough when it depends on the discipline that you're working on, right?
Yeah.
That, if you're, let's say, for example, like I'm an evolutionary biologist, we're not going to go back in time and watch these things happen. So everything that we do is about probability, and you have to take things, at beyond all reasonable doubt. This fits the pattern that we see, and that's the way we move forward with it. And I think that's probably fairly true for a lot of what Dr. Erin does too, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, with astrophysics, especially theoretical astrophysics, which was my realm, space is just this puzzle that we have to put together, because a lot of stuff that we study, we can't make labs of. We just have to take what space gives us and piece the science together from that. But I think all of us here, as scientists, you're taught to question things. You're taught to have an open mind. You're taught to, not say something is the absolute truth, because we know better than that. And unfortunately, that gets warped very easily.
Great word.
As a scientist, and especially as, with a strong background in mathematics and statistics, I'm 100% never going to say something is 100%. That's the only thing I'll ever say is absolutely true, is that there is no absolute truth. We will always say, we know that with 99.9999% certainty, even to the extent, and I think we were talking about this on your podcast, guys, that, with quantum physics, there is a tiny, tiny, tiny chance that if I run at my wall, I'll just run through it. And it's just because, the atoms might align in such a way that I could just pass through. Now, there's so many physics principles that make that incredibly not correct and not likely to happen, but it's not impossible. There's no such thing as 100% or 0%. And that's just what we're taught as scientists, to keep that open mind. But to say that there's replicability, that there's evidence, and to just kind of keep pushing that and asking the good questions. So that's a really good question. Thank you, Domestic.
Awesome. Also, something important, Melissa Longo, we all know Melissa Longo, she says, oh wait, where is it? She says, there it is. Hi.
Hi.
I miss you.
Good to see you, Melissa.
Go ahead.
Oh, I just wanted to touch on the probability thing. Even though all of science is probabilistic and we can never be 100% sure, I want to caution that this doesn't mean that we shouldn't take action on things, and especially really important things like climate change.
That's a good point.
A lot of climate deniers will say, well, your models aren't 100% accurate, and so you don't actually know if the Earth is warming. But if 99.7%, of the models are telling us something, then, we need to take that with a great deal of severity in our lives that this really is happening, and 100% certainty. Nobody makes any decision in their lives with 100% certainty. Like, we all put on our seatbelts when we get in the car, even though we're not certain if we're going to get into an accident, but we do it anyway. So
exactly.
we need to take what science is teaching us, and when science is certain to a great degree on something, we need to take action on that.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I was trying to say with the idea of it warping that really, when we say we don't know for sure, we're saying that as scientists, and that's where it can create a false equivalency or false doubt in society, where they say, well, the scientists aren't totally sure. We are very, very sure. We're just not going to say we're 100% sure, because we don't do that. We would be bad scientists if we did say that.
Absolutely. And to take a philosophy analogy that I remember this from my intro philosophy class from many years ago, we can't say with 100% certainty that we're not all just one brain in a box being fed stimulus, and that everything we see is not real. I mean, that's also true. So if you're going to say, I deny climate change, I deny evolution, well, I mean, maybe you don't even exist except that there's this brain in a box.
Maybe you shouldn't.
Right.
No, that does make me think you guys might be able to answer this question. There's certain sayings that have names, thought processes, like Occam's razor or Schrodinger's dog. Is there one that says, if you're wrong on this side of the argument, it's worse than if you're wrong on that side of the argument? Which is like, if you're wrong about saying that climate change is real, what do you have to lose? So a few bucks here, a little bit of discomfort there. But if you're wrong about it being correct, climate change actually happening, then you're going to lose the entire planet. Is there some kind of, or did we just create it?
There was some philosopher who used that in the context of religion, if I remember correctly.
Yeah. And certainly from my background doing systems engineering, it's risk probabilities that you make your decisions based on risk, not on certainties. But that's from a practicality standpoint as opposed to discovering new things standpoint.
Great point. Great game. Risk. Last question. Ilko de Boer. That's Nikki's. I don't know. Q&A. If the Roswell aliens were real and an actual Star Trek species, you got the chance to study them, which species would you like it to be? Which Star Trek species would you like to study, Michael?
Wow. What a great question. I thought the Roswell aliens were Ferengi, and we knew
I was waiting for somebody to say that. Great man.
Good answer.
Rock knows.
Love it.
What Star Trek species would I like to study? Definitely something as alien as possible. I think there are a few like gaseous life forms out there, or take the space whale. What were they called in Discovery? They had a funny name. Gormaganders, right? Something like that. Something that lives in a completely different environment, or just in a completely different way from the way that we normally think of life here on Earth. So, one of those gaseous life forms from TNG. I think one of them was called the Calamarain or something like that. Would be fun to study. Just something that shows us a really new way of existing. And that goes back to that quote from Q at the end of TNG and All Good Things, where it's like, you're not out here to just chart nebulae. You're out here to understand, to discover like new possibilities of existence. And that's what really fascinates me about exploring outer space, is that perhaps we're going to find life out there that looks nothing like us. And wouldn't that teach us something fundamental about why things like us and things not like us emerge, these complex information carrying structures that are able to perceive the universe? We're like the part of the universe that gets to know itself, and that's so cool.
Yeah. What about you, Erin?
I saw someone in the chat threw in the Borg species 84 Katie Carr, Borg species 8472 and the changelings. I like I've always been fascinated with like the alien conspiracy stuff. That's just like my guilty pleasure, is loving all of those, like the whole teardrop alien face. Like, yes. I'm just a sucker for that nonsense, but also from a fan of disaster sci-fi films. So the really scary ones, I'm like, oh yeah, bring it on. Like, we could also, I think Melissa mentioned the Breen earlier. Like, yeah, make it the Breen. I also love the Tholians. I just want an alien species. I don't care what it looks like. Some sort of creepy, weird alien thing is what I want.
Mohamed?
I've been thinking, so I had the same initial reaction as Mike, but I'd worry about a lot of those things. Like if we brought like the Gormagander, they would like get crushed because it's not used to being in an atmosphere or something like that.
That's so caring.
Right. If we want to study, we want it to be alive. If it just dies immediately, oh, now we've lost it. So I was trying to think of something that's really alien that we've seen. So I mean, the Horta would be an easy one, but again, I'm going to throw that one out. How about a baby version of that giant silicon thing that destroyed Data's home planet? But a baby version of it, not the big one that can destroy a whole planet. Because that one we saw within the atmosphere, so it can obviously live in a normal atmosphere and be alive.
I thought you were going with the encounter at Farpoint squids.
No, not them. That's too weird. But something that's silicon based, so it's not carbon based, so really, really alien. But same principles as what Dr. Erin and Dr. Mike said too. Great.
Well, Sirach, we learned so much today. I don't know how we can. I feel like I got to take a nap.
Hey, thank you guys for hosting this con and for hosting us. I mean, this has been fantastic.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. This has been a lot of fun, and to everyone engaging too.
Mm-hmm. This was wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really cool having you guys. And Sirach and I made a few jokes about it, but this is really cool. We do love learning from you guys. You have so many cool things to tell us and important things to say. We'll have all your information in the description box below. And everybody stay tuned. Click the link at the top of the description box, which is just below this video, which will take you to the next video, which is the Discovery Klingons. Or as they say in the first episode of Enterprise, Klingots. So we've got Mary Chifo and Kenneth Mitchell coming up in just a few minutes.
Two of the best humans ever. Enjoy. I mean, Klingons.
Applaud.
Yeah, they are the greatest. They are the greatest.
Great. Well, thank you all very much.
But thank you guys for smartening up the place and really sharing that knowledge.
Yeah. Thank you.
We'll appreciate it.
Yeah, Sirach's tired of having to deal with me and my dumb jokes. He's finally got something.
Your jokes are awesome. Come on.
No, they're a perfect contrast. They're a perfect contrast.
Great. Well, thank you all very much, and we'll see you on the next video. Have a great day. That was a fun end. We're still recording, though.
Oh.